we've got news about Binance seizing assets of Palestinians, the funds that they had stored on the centralized exchange, according to a letter that was written, what they were linked with some kind of terrorism linkage or something. Lucas, are you tracking this one at all?
Absolutely. I saw it. I was both not surprised. We know that governments all over the world are very interested in our finances because it is the chief way that they sniff out terrorism. They quote unquote follow the money, and we know that Binance had to submit to that system, and that occurred either before or leading into the arrest of CZ several months ago. Um, and I don't know if you remember the details of that arrest, but a plea deal was arranged with CZ and Binance, and possibly some sort of agreement worked out with giving access into uh, the transactions that were occurring in Binance, and who was holding what wallets. I don't know what all information they collect, but a plea deal was arranged, and CZ flew to Seattle, Washington, because he does not live in the United States. He's a citizen of Canada, and I believe he lives in China. I'm not sure where he was living at the time, maybe Taiwan, and or not Taiwan, sorry, Thailand. But he flew to Seattle, Washington, to accept that plea deal, and was arrested whenever he arrived. And then the federal prosecutors changed their case, and the judge held him until he was tried, and he was given 4 months. He was released into a halfway house in Long Beach, California last week, I believe on the 22nd, 6 days ago. So just to remind us all that as we talked about Pavel Durov and what the French did have done to him, and I've also seen reports recently that possibly Macron lured Durov to France to have with a promise of a dinner and probably some sort of discussion
Yeah,
about.
that situation's getting spicy because with the United Arab Emirates now said that they're canceling their purchase of planes from France as a result of what France did.
Perhaps we need to go edit the title of our episode about Durov and change it from the man without a country to the man with two countries, or maybe more. I was gratifying to see the UAE and Russia both call out France for the abuse of their citizen, and I in the wake of that, I thought Italy should also throw their should also make a claim to press France, because what France did was at least, well, I don't know, at least the United States charged him and lured him in under legal pretext. But either way, both countries, we talk a lot about democracy, but whatever happened to honesty and keeping our word? If democracy means running our mouths and we're just lying, then I don't know how much political security we can find in it. But to take it back to Binance, so we do know that Binance is cooperating with.
Well, wait a second, because an interesting part on him being a man without a country. Apparently, he was a citizen of France. That's news to me. I don't know if you saw that one.
I did see that, but did France claim him as a citizen? Did they offer citizenship and say, "Come to France and thank you for your outsized role in free speech"?
Well, and what does this mean to just collect up citizenships? Like, I mean, these like trading cards. I mean, you could just like be a citizen of all these different countries. Like, what's even the point of that?
I
What does
I
it get you to be a citizen of so many different countries?
I absolutely agree, and I'm not even sure where Nevis is, and I pride myself on knowing the countries of the world and where they exist on a map. Never heard of Nevis. Oh, Saint Kitts and Nevis. It's uh, uh, an island down in the Caribbean. Um, so that's interesting because those are some of those islands in the Antilles, Lesser Antilles. You can buy your citizenship there just in case. Um,
Well, I mean, just on this subject for a second, like I can maybe understand some sort of dual citizenship where you frequently are in both countries and maybe own property or have something, but like to be a citizen of four countries, I'm not even sure what that would mean. Like if you were to split it equally, you're not spending the majority of your time in any of these countries. You're not 50-50. That most you could be what 25% in each of these, so you're not really a citizen of any of them at that point. We should cap this at two.
I mean, it's a threat to national security, to be quite honest. Look at what's going on with APAC, the $100 million that have been spent on the election, and none of those agents registered with FARA, and that's something that Thomas Massey, several other politicians are beginning to call out because it is an issue, and we ought to think about not just Israeli dual citizenship. I think that is a very common one, um, uh, but we also have Mexican dual citizens, Canadian dual citizens. Yes, I can understand in a world before electronic records, that maybe it was difficult to change all of that information, but in part it should be a little bit difficult because we don't want people to be changing their citizenship as often as they decide they want to change their residence. But um, it's a lot easier and a lot more trackable than it previously was. And you think also about smaller nations that don't have a large economy that are looking to find something else to sell, and they sell their citizenship. And that's why I think Nevis is so very interesting, because there are many small, especially island nations that also bef- before um, before the United States cracked down on them, were engaging in shadow banking. We mentioned Nehru before. Uh, the strange reason that FTX was in the Virgin Islands was because it was a small economy, and so it gave preferential treatment and maybe allowed uh, more questionable practices with regards to holding capital, or any other number of ways, that made it attractive for a bank that could operate all around the world through the internet or through electronic communication to be located there. So we definitely need to be questioning. We need to be questioning dual citizenship, and we need to be thinking about. I mean, also, as immigration and illegal immigration is such an issue here in the United States, um, we ought to think about how easy it is to become a valid citizen in the United States. We never talk about, or politicians never talk about, I certainly do, about the real reason that people are coming to the United States, and that's because we have a magical font of dollars that we then spread all throughout the rest of the world. I wish that the political narrative of the United States was one that admitted the wrongness of basing all of world trade on the dollar, and admitted that was the real reason that immigrants want to come to the United States. Um, but uh, but that seems to be stalled out with some sort of imaginary belief that building a wall in Texas is going to stop people from getting through. I don't know how that's worked in the past, and I don't think it'll work in the future. But anyway,
Well, yeah, rolling back to the Binance thing, I think there's maybe a bit more to say about this. When you have money on a centralized exchange, you're really in no better position than just being in a traditional bank, because your funds are subject to the whims of the particular platform and whatever they respond to. So this has a bit more detail. It says it's affected 190 crypto accounts, and this was on the request of the Israeli Defense Force, right? So this is the IDF is saying, "Hey, these guys are terrorists." And I don't know exactly how much documentation was required for this, but certainly this is not the sort of self-sovereign crypto kind of world that we would normally think about in crypto. So like holding your money on a centralized exchange, you might as well just be going to some kind of an international bank, I guess.
Do you think about also in this narrative of Israel calling a Palestinian a terrorist? In the United States, we talked about terrorists, and we were actually talking about citizens of other countries and looking for a classification to give foreign nationals that gave us a legal basis for which to interfere in the sovereign immunity of other countries and to send CIA agents on an unmarked jet to round them up and fly them to Guantanamo, Cuba, or to do any other sort of things I mean it began in more innocent terms, like prosecuting bombers of various flights who had quote unquote engaged in terrorism. But this gets really problematic, and we throw the word terrorist now. I mean, think about with what trepidation the phrase domestic terrorist got trotted out. And think back to Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing, and there was this almost unthinkable or a real grappling with what to call somebody who was a citizen in the United States a terrorist. And that gradually began to gain steam. I think it's very out of control today. We ought to be getting back to thinking about citizens and thinking about laws that are in relation to actions, not getting into the minds or the notions of what the thinking or the politics or the ideology of different people are. But Palestinians, there's this talk of a two-state solution or a single-state solution. The Palestinians have asked for a two-state solution. Many members of the international diplomatic community call for a two-state solution. Israel seems very adamant against it, but they have they refer to Palestinians writ large as terrorists, and they do so under the logic that they voted for Hamas. I think that is incredibly problematic for them, and Binance seems to be caught up in the middle of it all. There's you bring up a good point also with keeping your money on an exchange rather than self-custodying it. I don't think that we can have a true expectation of intermediary exchanges or communication apps or anyone else to go to jail for us. Pavel Durov tried to do so, and yay that he did so. But I mean, how interesting is it that he came to the United States and he left the United States, as he said in the Tucker Carlson interview, because he was unsettled by the CIA trying to furtively gain access to the information in Telegram by buying off one of his software engineers. But I thought it very interesting that the CEO of Rumble, and his name is Chris, but I can't remember his last name. But the CEO of Rumble has said that the United States pressed him, and he was talking about Mark Zuckerberg in the wake of Zuckerberg's final admission of that Facebook and Instagram and the other Meta platforms have long been bowing their necks to censorship requests that have been made by um, uh, the president's administration, various agencies in the president's administration, CISA, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I thought it was very interesting that he said Rumble has never done that, and I believe Gab also said that. Well, I know that Gab has produced that information when pressed legally for it, because they did so with Thomas Crooks. But um, unless we are hosting and custodying our own information, I don't know that we can expect Binance or any other crypto institution, certainly not Coinbase or anyone else, not to play ball with the nation from which they are based.
Yeah, I think it's just something that everybody's got to remember in the world of crypto is that the main narrative is decentralization and self-custody and the elimination of counterparty risk. And this is just the evidence of, you know, counterparty risk existing on centralized exchanges. And it definitely exists within social media where you're not really in control of the data once you published it, and you're certainly not in control of the algorithm feed of whatever is putting information in front of you. So you have to wonder what the biases or what the particular bent of the platform is, and how it might be swayed. So these things are not lost on the centralized powers. They're seeing that these things are places where citizens are trying to gain some amount of autonomy or freedom, and that they're just the next place to try to peddle influence. So we're still seeing it. Uh, did you want to move on to the next topic that we said we wanted to look at, which was what's happening with OpenSea?
Sure, let's talk about OpenSea. But yeah, the issues that are raised as we see what has occurred with Binance in Palestine. It seems to be tied to a whole bunch of other issues that are going on right now across the world. I think it interesting that you brought up the citizenship aspect of it, though. I think that this is going to be a growing political question that is on our minds. Who does the government protect, and when it comes to warrants and wanting information, like in the case of Thomas Crooks, uh, the the assassin who was killed after attempting to assassinate Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania. Um, I think we could all agree that the government, as our representative, should have access to his communications, or whatever communications that they can get, and that they should also be sharing it with the population, the citizens of the United States. But not all of that is working correctly, because there's counterparty risk on the private side. There's also counterparty risk on the government side, and it seems that they're not producing all of the information that they've collected. But yeah, let's change the topics.
Well, so what's going on here is OpenSea got a Wells notice, and I suppose we could just throw some information about what a Wells notice is. Essentially, it's a notification of wrongdoing, that something has occurred, an infraction, and this comes from the SEC, and that they're planning on doing something. So this is sort of it in a nutshell: is that they're saying they have evidence of wrongdoing. They're planning on bringing in enforcement action, which is interesting because we've heard talk from the Biden/Harris administration that they were going to do a reset with crypto after Trump started to gain a significant amount of following, and people were saying that they were going to back the Trump campaign, and all cryptos seemed like it was lining up that direction. We heard about this great reset, but yet here is a major blow shot across the bow from the SEC against one of the biggest NFT platforms. Now, I know that that a lot of this activity has dropped since the fall out of favor of NFTs on Ethereum, but OpenSea was the premier platform where NFTs were being traded and trafficked, and so this is quite the shock, I think, because a lot of these digital goods really are not anything even close to securities. I think they're right on the money that a lot of it is this kind of activity, where it's art, collectibles, video game items, domain names, event tickets. Obviously, some of these have more broad sweeping utility and function. And so if you have the promise of return and collective activity, some of that stuff could possibly trip a Howey test. But I think the majority of this is just garbage art that's being dumped on chain and doesn't really have any security connotation or even like thought to it. So, this idea that all NFTs are this, I think is pretty sweeping and likely not to be the case.
I'm never quite satisfied with either the SEC's their presumption to declare what is money and who gets to control money, which is what they've been used for. The SEC should be concerned with thresholds, and they claim to be protecting investors, but those thresholds mean that they mainly protect rich investors. I don't know why rich investors get protected and retail investors. Uh, the SEC essentially acts as a guard dog to keep other people from engaging in, especially the use of blockchain technology to possibly doing things that they did not have access to before. I think this is part of the reason that so many people are upset with the SEC. And the SEC also has been put into a difficult situation because it was politicians who wanted them to put their thumbs down on cryptocurrencies, and the SEC also fell into that role because, again, as I say, securities back monies. The dollar is ostensibly backed by gold, even though we have narratives about it being backed by oil or debt or other things. But there's still a whole bunch of gold that's kept in a vault in the New York Federal Reserve, and even more so that's kept in Fort Knox, possibly. And a lot that's kept in the Bank of London or the Bank of England in London. But as we are beginning to rediscover, money can be backed by many different things, and so that has put the SEC in quite a conundrum. Politicians before turning to the SEC thought that they could turn off the internet, and if you remember back to 2011, 2012, we had acts that were Stop Online Privacy, SOPA, and I think maybe Prevent Internet Privacy Act was another one, PIPA, and those were actually really aimed at Bitcoin, and various other less secure internet monies that everyone talks about Satoshi, but there were less secure ideas of getting around the monopoly that the private interests that control the Federal Reserve had gained, and using the internet to get around and to create currencies that had their own small amount of gold backing, or or relied on something else. But the SEC has been put in quite a place, and their actions don't really make sense, and certainly don't seem fair. Uh, the use of a Wells notice too is, that when I think about what the SEC does, Grant, it largely is about forcing disclosure, and it's interesting that that they that blockchains are are at their core all about disclosure. So it's to go back to Roaring Kitty and the concerns that were thrown at them by various members of the House of Representatives Finance Committee. One of their chief ones was, well, did you disclose? Did you disclose? Did you disclose? If if America believes in capitalism, part of capitalism should be about letting people invest their money in things that they believe in and letting those people fail. And that gives a small window for politicians who are running to a conflagration or a tragedy, which they love to do, gives them a small window in which to wring their hands and talk about disclosure.
It reminds me of when Kennedy was giving his speech at Bitcoin Nashville, when he started talking about the truckers in Canada and what really brought him around to the idea of self-custody and cryptocurrency, and it being that you could easily be frozen out from the financial systems and the ability to participate in the economy. And that was that moment for him when he decided and realized that this was really one of the most important freedoms that people needed to have, is the freedom to be able to operate independently in the economy. And maybe this is something that never made it into the Bill of Rights or the amendments to the Constitution, because this sort of a thing wasn't really in the purview of anybody that was living at that time. How could you have anticipated electronic payments and centralized controls of money? Like, certainly they had banks, but people would walk around with either paper or specie, and that's how you engaged in commerce. And there was no idea that you could just freeze somebody out like this. So it's probably something that we're overdue for having some addition to the Bill of Rights that say that this is fundamentally something that the government is not allowed to do. And I know that we've strayed pretty far into this direction whenever we can label people bad actors, terrorists, whatever. But the problem with anything like that, as we've seen with what happened with Tulsi Gabbard, I mean, why is she on a no-fly list? Why is she being, flagged as a terrorist? And she's just a politician. Like, she's not engaging in any sort of behavior that, to my mind, would it, put her on any of those lists, or that would subject her to that kind of scrutiny. That seems very much like punishing political dissidents. And once we get into that sort of a frame in America, I think we're in bad trouble. And I think there's strong evidence that this has been happening quite frequently. I think we're gonna find out, when the next election comes around, if Trump gets elected. They've said that they're going to open up a lot of these files, and that Kennedy would be put in charge of these assassination attempts. I think we're going to find that we've got some bad actors within the United States government that have been doing things that they really shouldn't have been doing.
Amen to that, and that's been going on for quite some time, probably since Teddy Roosevelt, or beforehand, since the get go. But you question why we don't have an amendment in the Bill of Rights with regards to currency, but the reason is because it's written into the Constitution, and the federal government is limited to was is limited to, and it was written as such, to holding silver and gold in because they are prohibited from having a currency. And this is why the Federal Reserve is our central bank, and yet it is a private institution. And the sad thing is that we've allowed that to happen and a monopoly to be created. This is also why I think it's very important, because not only is the federal government limited to holding silver and gold and was not originally intended to be allowed to have a currency, and doesn't actually say that, is because their ideas of income tax and it wasn't unheard of. The income tax actually, first income tax gets levied immediately after the Civil War. So it's apportionment that gets removed coming out of, not after the Civil War, after the Revolutionary War. This is what Fry's Rebellion was over an income tax. And actually, that may have been before the Constitution, Fry's Rebellion. I think it's part of the reason that the Constitution was written. But the states are actually prohibited from also creating their own central banks and creating their own currencies. And that was understood at the time because there was an understanding that that you could have different monies, that you had different book accounting. We had not been pigeonholed into such a ubiquitous faith in the greenback, in the dollar. And we should have been a little bit more wary of it in 1861 and 1862 at the convenience of it, and been wary that like a private national bank providing convenience, that we should at the very least be sure and make be on guard and make sure that it did not become a monopoly. But instead, in 1913, when it was firmly established as a monopoly and legitimated, quote unquote legitimated, or legitimatized, whatever the word is, by the Federal Reserve Act, by then everybody just accepted it, and they didn't question how not having alternatives would really grant political power to eventually the politicians who would reach out to control the private bank of the Federal Reserve. I kind of talked myself off a cliff there. I don't know what I was thinking about, but I guess in short, it's not.
Well, it was unwinding why we don't have something, and I fully agree that there's a certain amount of how the government was supposed to be bounded with respect to money. I just, even with that though, that to me seems more about the issuance of currency and what can be accepted as money. I just don't think that in sort of back in the 1700s, 1800s, that they could have contemplated our electronical world and our electronic world where we're doing things cryptographically with money and banks and digitization of cash and all the rest of this stuff that's occurred in sort of just the into the late 1900s and into the early 2000s when all of this started to happen. I just don't think it's really written in a way that seems like it makes much sense to apply it. So I think we're probably overdue for this making it in some way and putting some strong bounds around it, because this idea that you can just freeze people out of the economy or that you can go seize the funds of people who have been identified by various players on centralized exchanges or tainting their coins in some way, this to me just seems like an egregious abuse of power. It's ripe for this kind of a thing, and I think it's the sort of thing that we've all got to be pretty concerned about. And when it comes to the abuse of power and censoring and deplatforming people, I think it's very akin to the other part of what we wanted to talk about today, which was TikTok taking one of these more prominent people who have been talking about a variety of different topics and deplatforming them. So these things are all kind of related, because if you in any way start talking about something that the power that the be don't want you to talk about, then your reach can be limited. You can be removed from something that you had been investing a significant amount of time and effort into, and essentially have your livelihood destroyed by something that you've said. And I think that Ian Carroll is another good example of this whole idea and topic around these centralized platforms just arbitrarily taking people out of the game, whether it's OpenSea, whether it's Palestinians who had money on Binance, or whether it's Ian Carroll who was using TikTok to try and get out a a message about election interference.
I even in the wake of Zuckerberg's admissions with Facebook, I saw several people who said, "Well, thanks for the late apology that was done so with an eye on Bobby Kennedy joining hands with Trump and the imminent win that's going to be coming, and forestalling the political blowback that's about to hit Facebook after November." But you haven't even stopped the shadow bans on their content or their accounts. And to me, like, this also gets at basic principles of the internet, and open being open source, but basic political principles. If somebody's keeping a secret, you're giving them power and trusting them. They're not going to do what's in your interest. They may do so at some point in time, but they're always going to be acting in their own interest. And so um, we do need to be I don't know, changing the world of the platforms that we live in. I don't know if that means busting up the monopolies that have been that we live amongst, Google and Meta being top of the list. I also think about Apple. I've heard a lot about Apple wanting to remove Telegram already from their app store, and they already do so with a lot of crypto apps, and abuse their marketplace in a way that like in a way that Microsoft didn't get away with, but did get away with, going back to their placement of Internet Explorer on their desktop. And
I think Apple is going to see some blowback for the way that they've been operating the App Store. I mean, some of the things that they've removed, some of the criticisms that have been leveled against how they've been managing the App Store, it's certainly within the European Union. They've been very concerned about overreach and the way that Apple's been running the show over there. So I think that that's something we could probably spend an entire episode on, is just the censorship that Apple's been engaging in with respect to the App Store. And I've seen some notes about people who have invested a significant amount of time and effort into building apps there, and then having them not available to distribute. And it's one of the reasons I really like the cross-platform creation of mobile apps, because that's just gives you a much broader reach and doesn't lock you into a particular platform. So it's pretty tough when you have companies and individuals that invest most of their time and effort into the Apple distribution platform, and they get deplatformed and aren't able to distribute their app. And if they were to try to reopen and do something else, then Apple quickly shuts that down. So you can see the destruction of a large amount of time, effort, treasury, and resources by the arbitrary whims of companies that really don't give you a fair shake. And according to the agreements that you sign when you first start to distribute things on their platform, you really don't even have a legal leg to stand on, because you can't go into the court system. You can't go get a trial of your peers to see if you can get resolution. You can only go through their web interface to type in a few characters. And if they decide that they don't like what you did, and that they won't give you a fair shake, you really don't have any recourse. And I've run up across this when using various of these platforms, and it's significantly soured me on wanting to use any kind of centralized institutions. It's why I continue to think that self custody and the removal of centralized platforms is really the fight and the important thing to do in our day and age. The internet was supposed to be a federated system where everybody had open access, and to a lot of extent we still have that. But as users have gravitated towards these centralized platforms, these centralized exchanges, that's where we've ceded control. And I think it's high time that the world of Web3 really begins to embrace what they need to, whether it's the centralized internet or self-custody or anything that just allows you to be self-sovereign. Like it's time to take control back of our data and our finances.
Confederated. Don't mean to correct you, but you know, federated was a was about was about applying force to this notion of voluntary inclusion from the Confederation of the Articles of Confederation before the Constitution, and
Yeah, I think I was thinking more in the software term, like the federated data access, and that's
well,
sort of, yeah.
true, but think about what a psyop that is, and when federal gets introduced with the Constitution, and how the Constitution has been a document that and going back to our earlier conversation, you know, I part of what I complain about the focus that we have on the Bill of Rights, but I think possibly the Bill of Rights is the true politically organizing document that we have, and we need to be thinking in a larger narrative of what the history of the United States, the history of the world is, whenever we talk about how we want to order our current world, because the Constitution has been abused. People pay attention to the parts they want to pay attention to. They ignore other parts, quite obviously. Look at the Federal Reserve and the FOMC, and many other things. And so, you know, maybe we do need a Bill of Rights. Maybe we need to even I guess I also think about this in all of these international discussions and international people, or people with several citizenships, how so many people hearken to these notions of the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, and some very fundamental ideas that have carried forth through our political experiment. But you know, with Apple, I've been a user of Apple. I used to be of Microsoft, especially Microsoft Word, and it's there are, and you're a developer, a mathematician. You live in a world of computers. I remember the first time Linux was brought to me, and there were all of these drivers that I had to find, and code that I didn't understand, that I was supposed to like pull up a terminal window and type in. But that is not the state of operating system and software alternatives today. And I think that that people fear moving out of Microsoft and Apple ecosystems and Google ecosystems, because they are not aware of what the alternative is,
or it's just hard to use. I think it's a valid criticism that I mean, I even see it with computer professionals that I work with, you know, that finally say, well, I'm gonna make the jump, and then I'm gonna start using, you know, Linux as my primary desktop. And then you start to try to just use it on a daily basis, and you run into little things that just don't work. And who has time to sit and troubleshoot or try to figure out how to make a particular thing work? And it's a valid criticism against these things that have a lot less money invested in them. There's a tremendous amount of value in ease of use. And so if you think about, you know, Microsoft or a Mac, these things are relatively easy to use for a user. When you think about something like Linux, and you got to load in a kernel and put a whole bunch of drivers in there to get just the fundamental stuff functional, even if you buy something, you know, from a centralized player like Dell, who offers a Linux laptop, you still hit a bunch of issues if you just try to go buy some off-the-shelf piece of equipment, and you can't plug it in and use it on your laptop. That's a pretty tough situation to be in. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who are just trying to use computers and don't have the time, effort, or expertise to really get this stuff functional on their own.
Well, maybe I think that we're going to see. I think they've come a long ways. I mean, they have GUI options. They
Oh, you mean like just running Linux as your desktop?
Yeah, especially running Linux as a desktop. But I was even thinking with regards to phones, there seem to be more and more options. We also rely on our phones so much. Who likes the walled garden, especially of the Apple iOS system, the inability to move a file on and off it? Um, I think that we are on the brink of seeing an explosion of. I mean, you bring up Dell too. There was a time whenever IBM had convinced everybody that they were the only people who knew how to put a computer together, apart from Tandy, and um, but when that collapsed, it collapsed quickly. There was Gateway, Dell. There were all sorts of IBM compatible computers
Ooh, Gateway. That's something you haven't heard about in a while. Is that's the one that had the cow boxes, right?
that that was, I was working for an ISP in the Gateway years, and I put together so many Gateway computers. It's unbelievable, right in those years. And people were blown away. I remember there was one retired gentleman who lived alone, and his grandson had bought him a Gateway computer, and I set it up for him. I get there to install the internet, which was an interesting time. And I said, "Where's your computer?" And he pointed to a box. And of course, I spent hours and hours and hours setting it up for him, because what else was it going to do? And he picked up the mouse. It's a great moment of my life. I just saw like light bulbs exploding to his head. He literally picked up the mouse, which was not a trackball mouse, but a you know a tailed roller mouse. I don't know what we would call it, but he picked it up and saw the pointer moving on the screen and the correlation between the two. And I knew him for several years afterwards, and he became a based hacker. He was all over every corner of the internet in use groups and all sorts of things. He you certainly can teach some dogs new tricks. I'll say that, but yeah.
Well, there's the resolution of what happened to Gateway. It looks like they were purchased by Acer. So this is more of the United States had this tremendous lead in the in 90s and 2000s and seemed to have blown their chance and opportunity to continue to be the leader. You know, when we had Texas Instruments and Gateway and Dell and all this stuff that was on American soil, and then whatever through NAFTA and other stuff, it seems like we've lost all of that. So yeah, here's Gateway have been purchased by Acer, the Taiwanese company.
What was it you were describing to me the other day with regards to different computer architectures? What was that word again?
Von Neumann.
Non von Neumann. It's not, or maybe it is a fashion. It's an emerging fashion line. I do think that we might see a new explosion and everyone talks about AI. I think I think
Well,
that.
now there's a centralization trend that we really got to keep an eye towards. I mean, that's like almost every single one of the AIs that you see out there, and again, it's all about this ease of use thing. I mean, who's got time to set up a GPU, try to go find a 4090 and get their open source, AI LLM loaded onto their own hardware and then have it be significantly less usable than ChatGPT or Claude? Like, it's just
Well, I think the centralization aspect of AI is really what's behind AI. Um, I'm not impressed. I've yet to be impressed with the answers that I get from a large language model. But when I do see it, I see that there's a great intersection of interests that are very much behind it and are driving a narrative about how flashy and fun and usable it is. And that intersection is, of course, energy companies and tech companies. And tech companies were incredibly threatened by the decentralization aspect of crypto. and the proof of work aspect of crypto also. I mean, think back to while we're living in the 90s, think back to like put your head together and think of the distribute. I can't even think of some of these terms anymore. The distributed computation for the human genome project. I mean, remember whenever you could.
Yeah, the folding at home, and then the SETI stuff. Yeah, those were some of the early distributed computing projects.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about SETI, but yeah, you could devote your downtime on your computer towards looking for aliens. We're still there.
Yeah, that seems like something that got a little lost. It's like now that there's all this talk of UAPs, like why isn't SETI finding some of this UAP activity to be up their alley? It seems a little strange that that none of that actually hit. If all this stuff that's being presented towards Congress is legitimate.
Well, I think, and I wonder again, thinking back to Bobby Kennedy's discussion with Tucker Carlson, and his revelation when he asked Donald Trump as to why Donald Trump Donald Trump said he didn't release JFK information at the begging of the director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo. Um, when all this UAP fascination came on the heels of an interview that John Brennan, signer of the Hunter Biden letter, I believe, maybe the first name, if not one of the first two names, on the Hunter Biden laptop is Russia disinformation. At the very same time is whenever he gave an interview and also brought that up at the Aspen Security Conference, and he sort of obliquely said, "Well, there are things that we don't understand. There is phenomenon out there that is beyond our comprehension." Wink, wink. And so, it's not that I don't believe that there can be like intelligence and things that exist that we don't understand, but I certainly think that we have allowed ourselves, going back to that third trusted party of government, we have given license to agencies in the government to lie, and told them, as long you can lie as long as you don't lie to us. That distinction has not held, and not only that, but you can give them all of the truth and none of the honesty, in the words of Colin McCann, and I think that we are given pieces of truth and that are dishonest, just as I would imagine John Brennan. I mean, like, I was amazed when he said that. I thought, what an interesting thing to say to a group of people. And the journalists ran screaming to their editors to say the director of the CIA just admitted that there are aliens. And I said, that's not what he said. He said there's phenomenon that we cannot explain. And those are very different. But if it's easy to manipulate some people who especially want to excite interest and go sell a story.
Well,
So,
we might be overdue for doing an episode on that. There was some of the stuff that came out of the recent UAP phenomena discussion before Congress that happened, where they talked about some pretty significant findings of biological craft being recovered, whatever. And again, this is all just stuff that military officials and ex-military officials said that they had direct evidence of, and that they were supplying to various closed committees. That I thought was a pretty substantive meeting that happened, and that was just recently. I think it was earlier this year. So probably be a good idea to actually do a whole episode just to review that.
it was earlier this year, and Tim Burchett, representative from Kentucky, if not, or Tennessee, I'm not one of those two horizontal states. Tim Burchett was a driving force behind that. He's very interested in. I mean, I think that maybe he's very excited and believes that there are some secrets there, but he's also very driven by wanting to know where money disappears to in the Pentagon. And did you happen to see the amount of dollars that were mistakenly granted to Afghanistan in the last year?
I did see that where they paid out like $239 million to the Taliban.
It was a
Apparently,
mistake. It
yeah.
was absolutely a mistake, because sometimes I leave $239 million on the bureau and forget that I left it there. And I don't discover that until I do an audit, months and months and months later. So I don't know what a mistake means to you, but yeah, where's the trust and where's the honesty? Going back to earlier themes. But anyway, I don't mean to get too far off on that. I would love to do a deeper dive into the discussion at the Oversight Committee. I believe it was a House Oversight Committee meeting about the UAPs and what's been going on there. I know Ashton talks about MH370 and time warping. There's something that interesting that happened with MH370. That was the flight from was it from Manila to China that disappeared? I forget what the actual route of the flight is. So there's possibilities of certainly of technologies that are being hidden from us, but I tend more to lean the way of Jean Le Carré and think that there are hints of things that don't exist that are trotted out to manipulate us. So, well, that's all I've got today. I don't know if you have anything more that you want to add.
No, I think that was a great show and a good roundup on a topic that's near and dear to our hearts: decentralization, centralization of control and platforms, and seeing all of this stuff happening kind of in rapid succession. I hope for some good news in the days to come, but I fear more of this is going to happen than less of it. So, yeah, unfortunate that we have to be the bearers of bad news, but this is all stuff that needs to stay foremost in our mind as we vote with our dollars and we vote at the ballot box to continuously push towards people being at the center of the world, decentralization being the thing that we center on, and the not allowing for powers that be to take away our rights to speak or transact.
Yes, well, everyone, no French couture for your fall wardrobe this year. Keep it American. T-shirts and blue jeans.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow.